I always thought Clara was the kind of woman who'd never stray. 20 years of marriage, 2 kids, a house with a wraparound porch. We'd built something solid, or so I believed. My name's Daniel, and I'm a structural engineer. A man who spends his days calculating load-bearing beams and stress points. Ironic, isn't it? I missed the cracks forming right under my own roof. It started with little things. Her phone buzzing at odd hours, her stepping out to take calls she claimed were from her sister, the faint scent of cologne on her scarf that wasn't mine. I didn't want to see it. I told myself I was paranoid, that love meant trust. But love, it turns out, can blind you to the obvious. Clara worked part-time at a boutique downtown, a little place that sold overpriced candles and artisanal soaps. She'd come home glowing, talking about the customers, the displays, her coworker Marcus. Marcus. The name didn't mean much at first, just a guy she mentioned in passing, someone who helped her lift boxes or rearrange shelves. He was younger, she said once, laughing. Oh, he's practically a kid, Daniel, full of energy. I pictured some scrawny 20-something with acne and a bad haircut. I didn't picture what I'd later learn. A man with sharp cheekbones, a gym-built frame, and a smirk that could charm the paint off a wall. The first real hint came on a Tuesday in October. I come home early from a site inspection, my boots still caked with mud. Clara wasn't there. The kids, Ellie, 16, and Sam, 12, were sprawled on the couch, glued to their screens. "Where's Mom?" I asked. Ellie shrugged, not looking up. She said she had to close the shop tonight. That didn't sit right. Clara never closed on Tuesdays. It was the slowest day. Called her. No answer. Texted. Nothing. Hours later, she breezed in. Hair slightly mussed, cheeks flushed. "Sorry, babe," she said, kissing my forehead. Last-minute inventory. Her lips tasted faintly of mint gum, but beneath it, something else. Something earthy, unfamiliar. I didn't confront her then. I'm not a man who leaps to conclusions. I observe, I measure, I test. So I started paying attention. The late nights piled up. The excuses got flimsier. She'd laugh too hard at nothing, her eyes darting away when I asked about her day. I found a receipt in her purse once. Dinner for 2 at a place we'd never been together. "A friend from work," she said when I asked, her voice tight. I nodded, but the weight settled in my chest, heavy as concrete. Clara was slipping away, and I wasn't ready to admit who was pulling her. Then came the night that broke everything open. I'd been out of town for a conference, but it wrapped up early. I drove home, 3 hours in the dark, thinking I'd surprise her. The house was quiet when I pulled in, past midnight. Her car was there. So was another, a sleek black sedan I didn't recognize. My stomach twisted. I crept inside, silent as a shadow. The living room was empty, the kitchen dark. Then I heard it. A low murmur, a laugh, coming from our bedroom. My bedroom, our bed. I stood there, frozen, my hand on the doorknob, knowing that turning it would shatter everything I'd ever known. I didn't open the door that night. Call it cowardice, call it calculation. I needed proof, not just suspicion. My hand trembled as I backed away, the sounds from behind that door carving into me like a dull blade. Clara's voice, soft and playful, mingled with a deeper one, unfamiliar but confident. I retreated to the garage, sat in my truck, and stared at the wall until the headlights of that black sedan finally pulled away an hour later. I didn't sleep, couldn't. Instead, I planned. The next morning, Clara acted like nothing had happened. She made coffee, hummed a tune, kissed me on the cheek as I left for work. "You look tired," she said, her brow furrowing with fake concern. "Rough trip." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, long drive." She didn't suspect I'd been home. She didn't know I'd seen the car, heard the laughter. But I knew Marcus now. I'd looked him up after finding his name on the boutique's website. Marcus Reed, 32, assistant manager. His photo showed a man with dark hair, a jawline that could cut glass, and eyes that seemed to mock me through the screen. I started gathering evidence. I'm methodical, it's my nature. I installed a tracker on her car, small and discreet, hidden under the wheel well. I synced her phone to a cloud backup I could access, something she'd never notice. The data trickled in over days. Late-night drives to an apartment complex across town. Texts she deleted, but I could still read. "Can't wait to see you," she'd written to him. "Miss your hands," he'd replied. My stomach churned, but I kept going. I needed more than words. I needed to see it. One evening, I followed her. She told me she was meeting a friend for drinks. Another lie. The tracker led me to a dimly lit bar on the edge of the city. I parked across the street, watched her step out of her car in a dress I'd never seen, red and clingy. Marcus met her at the door, his arm sliding around her waist like it belonged there. They disappeared inside, and I sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I could have stormed in, made a scene, but that wasn't me. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done, not just the shock of being caught. Days later, I got the final piece. A tiny camera, motion-activated, hidden in the bedroom when she was at work. I told myself it was for closure, not obsession. That night, she said she was staying late again. I waited until the kids were asleep, then checked the feed. There they were, Clara and Marcus, tangled in our sheets, oblivious to the lens capturing every moment. Her laughter, his whispers, the way she looked at him. It wasn't just betrayal. It was replacement. I watched until I couldn't anymore, then saved the file. Evidence secured. Now the real work began. I didn't confront Clara right away. Rage burned in me, but I tamped it down, let it simmer into something colder, sharper. I'm not a man who lashes out blindly. I build things, and I destroy them just as carefully. She'd humiliated me, yes, but I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of a quick explosion. I wanted her to unravel slowly, to feel the ground shift beneath her without knowing why. And Marcus? He'd get his own reckoning. First, I studied them. The camera footage gave me more than proof, it gave me insight. Clara glowed with him in a way she hadn't with me in years. Marcus was cocky, casual, treating her like a prize he'd won. I dug deeper. His apartment address from the tracker led me to public records. Marcus Reed, single, no kids, a string of minor debts. The boutique's payroll showed he made less than Clara, yet he drove that shiny sedan. Something didn't add up. I hired a private investigator, a grizzled guy named Paul who didn't ask too many questions. "Follow him," I said. "Find his weak spots." While Paul worked, I played the part of the oblivious husband. Clara noticed nothing. She'd come home, chatter about her day, and I'd nod, smile, ask just enough to keep her comfortable. Inside, I was mapping her destruction. The kids were my anchor. Ellie with her sharp wit, Sam with his quiet trust. I couldn't let them see me break. Not yet. But every time Clara touched me, every time she lied, I felt the fault lines in our marriage widen. Paul called a week later. "Your boy's dirty," he said. "Side gig moving product, pills mostly. Oxy, some benzos. Keeps it low-key, but he's got a supplier." That explained the car, the confidence. Marcus wasn't just a homewrecker. He was a small-time crook. Perfect. I thanked Paul, paid him double to keep digging. Knowledge was my weapon now, and I was loading the chamber. At home, I started small. I moved things, her favorite mug went missing, her keys ended up in odd places. She'd frown, mutter about losing her mind. "You okay, hon?" I'd ask, all concern. She'd laugh it off, but I saw the unease flicker. Then I escalated. I canceled her credit card, claiming a fraud alert. She scrambled to fix it, flustered. I accidentally locked her out of her email, forcing her to reset everything. Little disruptions piling up. She didn't suspect me. She thought it was bad luck. That was the beauty of it. The real blow came when I tampered with her phone. A fake message from Marcus. "We need to cool it. Too risky." She read it while I cooked dinner, her face paling. "Everything okay?" I asked, stirring the pot. "Yeah, just work stuff," she mumbled. I knew she'd text him later, confused, and he'd deny sending it. Doubt would creep in. I smiled into the steam. This was only the beginning. Clara started to fray. The disruptions I'd planted, lost items, tech glitches, the fake text, gnawed at her. She snapped at the kids over nothing, paced the house like a caged animal. I watched, silent, feeding the chaos. "You seem stressed," I'd say, handing her tea laced with just enough chamomile to keep her off balance. She'd nod, distracted, her mind clearly elsewhere. Marcus, I knew, was her escape, but I was tightening the noose around that too. Paul's reports grew juicier. Marcus wasn't just peddling pills, he was skimming from his supplier, a guy named Victor with a rap sheet and a temper. Risky move for a pretty boy like Marcus. I filed that away, a gleaming tool for later. For now, I focused on Clara. I needed her to feel isolated, vulnerable. I hacked into her boutique scheduling system. Easy enough with a phishing email she clicked without thinking. Her shifts got scrambled. Putting her on days Marcus was off. She complained about it over breakfast, oblivious to my hand in it. "They're screwing me over," she said. "Maybe it's a sign," I replied, sipping my coffee. She didn't catch the edge in my voice. Then I went for her social circle. Clara had a tight group of friends. Gossipy women who'd cover for her if she asked. I didn't need them sniffing around. Using a burner phone, I sent anonymous texts. Vague warnings about Clara's new habits. Hints she was hiding something. Nothing concrete, just enough to stir suspicion. Within days, her best friend, Jen, stopped by less. Phone calls dried up. Clara noticed. "Everyone's acting weird," she said one night, staring at her silent phone. "People drift," I said, shrugging. She looked at me, searching, but I kept my face blank. The bedroom footage kept rolling. Marcus still came over when I was out, though less often. Their encounters grew tense, her clingier, him distracted. My fake text had planted a seed, and I watered it. Another message, this time from her to him. "I'm done. You're not worth it." He showed up that night, pounding on the door. I was home, playing dumb. "Who's that?" I asked as Clara paled. "Just someone drunk. Probably," she stammered, rushing to shoo him away. I heard their hushed argument through the window. His confusion, her panic. The rift was widening. By now, I had enough to ruin them both, but I wasn't ready. Clara's unraveling was satisfying, but Marcus needed to feel it too. I contacted Victor, his supplier, through a throwaway email. "Your boy Marcus is skimming," I wrote, attaching a photo Paul had snapped of Marcus with a wad of cash. No reply came, but I didn't need one. The dominoes were falling. I just had to wait. Clara's world was crumbling, and she didn't even know I was the architect. She'd lost her rhythm. Forgetting appointments, burning dinner, staring into space. The kids noticed. "Mom's weird lately," Ellie said one morning, poking at her cereal. "She's just busy," I lied, ruffling her hair. Sam stayed quiet, but his eyes followed Clara like he sensed something too. I hated that they were collateral, but I couldn't stop now. This was bigger than them, bigger than me. Marcus was slipping too. Paul reported he'd been jumpy, looking over his shoulder. Victor must have gotten my tip. One night, Paul tailed him to a warehouse. Marcus left with a black eye and a limp. Good. I wanted him scared, cornered. But I wasn't done with Clara yet. I upped the ante. Using her phone's cloud access, I sent Marcus a photo from their last rendezvous. Her smiling, him smirking, both oblivious to the camera. No caption, just the image. He'd think she was taunting him. She'd deny it when he asked. Trust was their weak point, and I was prying it apart. At home, I played the concerned husband to perfection. "You're not yourself," I said one evening, touching her shoulder. She flinched barely, but I caught it. "I'm fine," she snapped, then softened. "Just tired." I nodded, letting her stew. That night, she called Marcus from the bathroom, thinking I couldn't hear. "What's with the picture? Are you messing with me?" His voice crackled through the door, angry. "I didn't send anything," she hissed. I smiled into my pillow. Paranoia was a beautiful thing. Then I hit her where it hurt most, her vanity. Clara prided herself on her looks, always had. I swapped her shampoo with a formula that dulled her hair, her lotion with one that dried her skin. Subtle, slow changes. She started fussing in the mirror, buying new products, none of which worked. "I look awful," she muttered one morning, tugging at brittle strands. "You're beautiful," I said, the lie smooth as silk. She didn't believe me, and that was the point. The final touch for this phase was financial. I drained our joint savings, moved it to an account she couldn't touch, claiming a bank error when she noticed. She panicked, called the bank, got nowhere. "How are we supposed to live?" she asked, voice shaking. "We'll figure it out," I said, calm as ever. She didn't know I had the money safe, didn't know I was strangling her options. Marcus couldn't help her, he was too busy dodging Victor. The trap was set, and they were both stumbling into it. Clara was a ghost of herself now, and I relished every shadow under her eyes. The kids were at school, the house silent, and she sat at the kitchen table, staring at a cold cup of coffee. Her hair hung limp, her skin sallow from the tampered products. "I don't know what's happening to me," she said, voice small. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and offered a sympathetic nod. "Maybe you need a break," I suggested, knowing she couldn't afford one. Not with the savings gone and her confidence in tatters. She didn't answer, just rubbed her temples. I left her there, drowning in her own confusion. Marcus was next on my list. Victor's roughing him up was a start, but I wanted more than bruises. Paul had tracked down Marcus's supplier network. Small-time, sloppy, ripe for exposure. I spent a night crafting an anonymous tip to the local police. Dates, locations, a description of that black sedan. I didn't send it yet. Timing was everything. Instead, I focused on his pride. Using a spoofed number, I texted his gym buddies, guys he bragged to about his conquests. "Marcus can't keep up anymore," I wrote, attaching a grainy photo of him limping from the warehouse. "Let them laugh. Let him squirm." Clara's isolation deepened. Her friends were distant, her job a mess thanks to the schedule tweaks. I pushed harder. I accidentally forwarded an email from her phone to the boutique owner. A rant she'd sent Marcus about how much she hated the place. The owner called her in furious. "You're on thin ice," Clara told me later, tears in her eyes. "They think I'm ungrateful." I hugged her, murmuring comfort, while inside I cheered. She was losing everything she'd clung to, and Marcus couldn't save her. He was too busy saving himself. The bedroom camera caught their next meeting, a desperate, fumbling encounter. Clara clung to him, pleading. "I need you," she whispered. Marcus pulled away, distracted, muttering about problems at work. I watched the footage later, noting his irritation, her neediness. Perfect. I edited the clip, her voice looped, begging over and over, paired with his cold rejection. I sent it to her from an unknown number. She'd think he'd betrayed her, mocked her vulnerability. When she confronted him, he'd deny it, and the fracture would widen. That night, she came home late, eyes red. "Rough day?" I asked, chopping vegetables for dinner. She nodded, avoiding my gaze. "Just stuff." I didn't press. I didn't need to. The seeds were sprouting, choking her from the inside. Marcus, meanwhile, was unraveling faster. Paul saw him arguing with Victor in a parking lot, fists clenched, voices raised. I smiled at the report. The noose was tightening, and I was pulling the rope. Clara stopped pretending everything was fine. She'd snap at me over nothing. Burnt toast, a misplaced sock, then apologize, her voice brittle. "I'm just tired," she'd say, but I saw the cracks. She checked her phone constantly, waiting for Marcus to fix her, to pull her out of the spiral I'd engineered. He didn't. He couldn't. Victor had cut him off, Paul said. Marcus was scrambling to pay debts, his side gig collapsing. I decided it was time to turn up the heat. I sent the police tip. 2 days later, Paul called. Cops raided his place. Found enough pills to book him. Marcus was arrested, his sedan impounded. I watched the news that night. A small story about a local man caught with contraband. Clara didn't see it. She was too busy staring at her silent phone. I wondered if she'd try to visit him, but she didn't. Fear, maybe, or shame. Either way, she was alone now, just as I'd planned. At home, I kept the pressure on. I found an old photo of us on our honeymoon. left it on the counter with a note. Remember when we were happy? She saw it, froze, then crumpled it in her fist. Why'd you leave this out? She demanded. Thought it'd cheer you up, I said, all innocence. She stormed off, but I'd seen the guilt flash in her eyes. Good. I wanted it to fester. Next, I messed with her car, loosened a hose, subtle enough to strand her without suspicion. She came home fuming after it broke down, AAA towing it back. Everything's falling apart, she muttered. Not everything, I said, smiling. She didn't catch the jab. Marcus's arrest gave me an opening. I mailed Clara a burner phone, preloaded with fake texts from him. You set me up. I trusted you. She'd find it in a package labeled urgent. No return address. When it arrived, I was there watching her open it. Her hands shook as she read, her face draining of color. What's that? I asked casual. Nothing, she stammered, shoving it in a drawer. But I knew she'd call him, scream at him, and he'd have no idea what she meant. The mistrust would be a blade between them. I wasn't done with Marcus. Jail wasn't enough. He'd charm his way out eventually. I contacted a guy I knew from a past job, a rough type who owed me a favor. Spread word inside, I said. Marcus reads a snitch. Word travels fast in lockup. By week's end, Paul heard he'd been jumped. Nothing fatal, just painful. I pictured his pretty face swelling, and it felt like justice. Clara was a shell now, moving through the house like a phantom. The burner phone incident broke something in her. She stopped checking her real one, stopped leaving the house unless she had to. The kids noticed more. Mom's freaking me out, Sam said one night, his voice small. I hugged him, promised it'd be okay. It wouldn't, not for her, but I'd shield them as long as I could. Ellie was sharper. She asked outright, Is Mom sick? I dodged. She's just stressed, kiddo. They didn't need the truth yet. I turned my focus to the boutique. Clara's job was her last lifeline, fragile as it was. I emailed the owner again from her account. This time a resignation letter, polite but firm. I can't keep up anymore, it read. The owner replied quickly, accepting it without question. Clara found out when her next shift vanished. She called in, frantic, but it was done. They said I quit, she yelled, pacing. That's crazy, I said, feigning shock. Must be a mix-up. She didn't buy it, but she had no proof, no fight left. Marcus was suffering too. My jail contact confirmed he was persona non grata. Isolated, battered, his charm useless behind bars. I sent him a package. A single photo from the bedroom footage, Clara laughing in his arms, with "She's why" scrawled on the back. Let him stew on that, let him think she'd turned on him. I didn't care if he believed it. What mattered was the doubt, the rage eating him alive. At home, I staged the next blow. I accidentally left my laptop open. A bank statement showing the savings moved to my private account. Clara saw it, confronted me. Where's our money, Daniel? Her voice shook with accusation. Bank screwed up. I lied, calm as ever. I'm fixing it. She didn't believe me, but she couldn't prove it. That night, she slept on the couch, the first time in years. I didn't mind. The bed felt cleaner without her. The kids were my priority now. I started preparing them. Subtle hints that Mom might need help, soon. She's not herself, I'd say, planting seeds for later. Clara didn't notice. She was too lost in her own collapse. I watched her stare out the window, hollow-eyed, and felt a grim satisfaction. She'd chosen this path. I was just paving it. Clara's descent was almost complete. She barely ate, barely spoke. The house felt like a tomb, and I was the undertaker. The kids tiptoed around her, confused but obedient when I told them to give her space. Mom's going through something, I said, and they nodded, trusting me. I hated using them as pawns, but they'd understand one day, when they were older, when they could handle the truth about her. I struck at her last refuge, her family. Clara's sister, Beth, lived an hour away, a nosy type who'd always liked me. I called her, voice heavy with concern. Clara's not well, I said. She's pushing us away, acting strange. I'm worried she's hiding something. Beth bought it, promised to check in. When she did, Clara brushed her off, snapped actually, from what Beth told me later. She told me to mind my own business, Beth said, hurt. I sighed, all sympathy. She's not herself. Beth agreed to keep her distance. Clara's lifeline snapped. Marcus was a footnote now, but I twisted the knife. I mailed him another photo. This one of Clara at home, alone, staring blankly, captioned, "She's moved on." Let him think she'd abandoned him in his cell. I heard through Paul he'd trashed his bunk in a rage, earning solitary. Perfect. He was a rat in a cage, gnawing at himself. I didn't need to touch him anymore. His own mind would do the work. At home, I orchestrated the final unraveling. I found a letter in Clara's handwriting, forged, of course, detailing her guilt, her shame, her plans to leave. I left it where Ellie would see it. She did, handed it to me wide-eyed. "Dad, what's this?" I read it aloud, voice shaking for effect. "I don't know, sweetheart. I don't know what she's thinking." Ellie cried. Sam overheard, and the kids turned to me, their rock. Clara came home to a quiet accusation in their stares. "What's wrong?" she asked, frantic. "Ask them," I said, walking away. She tried to explain, but the kids pulled back. Hurt, confused. I primed them just enough. That night, she cornered me. "What did you do, Daniel?" Her voice was raw, desperate. "Me?" I said, meeting her gaze. "I'm just trying to hold us together." She stared, searching for the lie, but I was granite. She backed off, defeated. The trap was closing, and she felt it. Clara broke the next morning. She stood in the kitchen, hands trembling, and demanded answers. "Why is everyone against me? The kids, Beth, you, everyone." Her voice cracked, tears streaking her face. I stayed calm, leaning against the counter. "I don't know what you mean," I said. "Maybe it's you pushing them away." She lunged at me, not to hit, just to grab my shirt, to shake some truth loose. I didn't flinch. "Tell me what's happening," she screamed. The kids heard, peeked in, then fled upstairs. I pried her hands off, gentle but firm. "You need help, Clara," I said, low and steady. She sank to the floor, sobbing. I called a doctor friend, Tom, who owed me a favor. "She's having a breakdown," I told him over the phone, loud enough for her to hear. "I'm scared for her." Tom arrived an hour later, a calm professional in a crisp suit. Clara tried to protest, but her wild eyes and tangled hair made my story stick. "She's not sleeping, not eating," I said, playing the worried husband. Tom nodded, prescribed sedatives, suggested a psych evaluation. Clara took the pills. I made sure of it, her resistance dulled by exhaustion. Marcus was a distant echo now, but I checked in. Paul said he'd been released on bail, beaten down, reputation trashed. I sent one last gift. A letter, forged as Clara's, confessing she'd tipped off the cops. I couldn't live with it anymore. It read. I mailed it to his apartment, knowing he'd read it alone, broken. Let him hate her. Let it burn. At home, Clara slept, drugged and docile. I sat the kids down. "Mom's sick," I said. "She might need to go away for a while." Ellie nodded, teary. Sam hugged me. I'd won them completely. Clara woke later, groggy, and saw the suitcases I'd packed. "What's this?" she slurred. "You need rest," I said. "A facility upstate. Tom recommended it." She tried to argue, but the pills muddled her. I drove her there myself, checked her in. The staff saw a distraught husband, a fragile wife. No one questioned it. She'd lost everything. Her lover, her job, her family, her mind. I'd built her ruin, beam by beam, and now it stood complete. But I wasn't done. Revenge wasn't just her fall. It was her knowing who'd pushed her. Clara was gone, locked away in that upstate facility, and the house felt lighter without her. The kids adjusted. Ellie threw herself into school. Sam clung to me more, but they didn't ask too many questions. "Mom's getting better," I'd say when they did, and they'd nod, trusting me. I'd built that trust over years, and now it was my shield. The staff at the facility sent updates. Clara was disoriented, withdrawn. The sedatives kept her foggy, and the forged letter I'd slipped into her intake file, hinting at delusions and guilt, ensured they'd keep her there. I'd framed her as unstable, and they bought it. Marcus was my loose end. Released on bail, he'd slunk back to his apartment, a shell of the man who'd swaggered into my life. I wasn't satisfied. He'd touched what was mine, broken what I'd built. So I dug deeper. Paul found his weak spot. A sister, Lila, living 2 states over, clean-cut, clueless about his mess. I sent her a package, photos from the bedroom footage, Clara and Marcus tangled together, with a note. Your brother's ruin. No return address, just enough to shame him through her eyes. Paul confirmed she'd called him hysterical. Marcus unraveled further, drinking alone, his world shrinking. At home, I dismantled Clara's traces. Her clothes went to donation bins, her jewelry into a safe. The kids didn't notice much. I kept them busy with outings, school projects. But I left one thing. Her perfume, spritzed faintly in the hall. Ellie caught it once, froze. Is Mom here? She whispered. Just a memory, I said, squeezing her shoulder. It was cruel, maybe, but it kept Clara's ghost alive, a reminder of what she'd lost. I wanted her to haunt them just enough to cement my story. The facility called a week later. Clara was asking for me, begging to come home. She's distressed, the nurse said. Keeps saying she's been framed. I sighed into the phone, loud enough for effect. She's been saying wild things for months. I don't know what's real anymore. They upped her meds. I smiled, picturing her trapped, her pleas drowned in chemical haze. She'd feel my hand in this eventually. I was counting on it. I wasn't done with Marcus. His arrest had cost him his job, his car, his swagger, but he still breathed free air. I mailed Victor a final tip. Marcus is out talking to cops. A lie, but Victor wouldn't check. Paul saw the fallout. Marcus's apartment trashed, him fleeing town overnight. I didn't care where he went. He'd carry the wreckage I'd built, a nomad with nothing left. Clara's absence settled into routine. The kids stopped asking when she'd return, and I stopped offering vague promises. She's where she needs to be, I'd say, and they'd move on. Ellie to her books, Sam to his games. I'd won them fully now, their loyalty a quiet victory. The house was mine again, scrubbed of her influence, though I kept that perfume trick going, a subtle jab at her memory. Neighbors asked after her sometimes. She's getting treatment, I'd reply, voice heavy with practiced grief. They'd pat my arm, offer casseroles. I played the part well. Marcus was a whisper now, gone from the city, chased out by Victor's wrath. Paul tracked him to a dingy motel estate over, broke, alone, a shadow. I sent one last gift, a postcard of our house, no message, just the image. Let him stare at it, let it remind him of what he'd lost trying to take mine. I didn't need to see his face to know it had cut. His sister had disowned him, Paul said, after my package. Good. He'd rot in isolation, a fitting end. The facility sent a letter. Clara had tried to call me, but I'd blocked her number there. She's agitated. The note read, claims you've orchestrated everything. I called back, feigning concern. She's delusional, I told the doctor. She was hiding things, affairs, lies. I found proof. I emailed them a doctored text thread, Clara confessing to Beth. They bought it, added it to her file. Her cries for help became more evidence against her. I pictured her pacing her room, trapped, and felt the weight lift off me. I started rebuilding. New furniture, fresh paint, erasing her from the walls. The kids helped, picking colors, laughing again. It's like a new start, Ellie said, brushing blue onto the living room. Yeah, I agreed, smiling. It was. Clara's boutique closed. Owner gave up after the chaos I'd sown. I drove by once, saw the for lease sign, and nodded to myself. Another piece gone. Her world was rubble, and I'd laid every brick. But I wanted her to know. Not yet. She wasn't ready to face it. I needed her weaker, broken further. So I waited, letting the facility do its work. letting Marcus drift into oblivion. Revenge wasn't just their fall. It was the moment they saw my hand in it, too late to claw back. Months passed, and Clara faded from our lives like a stain scrubbed clean. The kids thrived. Ellie aced her exams, Sam joined soccer. I coached his team, stood on the sidelines cheering, a pillar for them both. Neighbors stopped asking, assuming she'd left for good. "You're doing great," they'd say, and I'd nod humble. Inside, I was steel forged by what I'd done. The facility sent fewer updates. Clara was stable, medicated, compliant. I knew better. She was a husk and I'd hollowed her out. Marcus surfaced briefly. Paul found him working a gas station, unshaven, eyes sunken. I sent a local thug a tip, $50 to rough him up, no questions. Paul saw him later, limping, a fresh cut on his lip. I didn't need more. He was a footnote, a smear on my past. But I mailed him one final taunt. A photo of Clara's intake form, her signature shaky, with "You did this" scrawled across it. Let him think she blamed him. Let it fester. I visited Clara for the first time. The facility was sterile, gray, her room a box with a narrow bed. She sat there, hair dull, hands folded. She looked up, eyes widening. "Daniel." Her voice was thin, hopeful. I sat across from her, calm. "How are you?" I asked, like we were catching up over coffee. She stared, searching my face. "You did this," she whispered. I didn't flinch. "You're confused," I said, voice soft. "You hurt us, Clara. The kids, me. You chose him." She shook her head, tears welling. "No, I didn't. I swear." I leaned in, dropped the mask just enough. "I saw you. I heard you. In our bed." Her breath caught, realization dawning. "The camera," she gasped. I nodded, slow, deliberate. Every laugh, every touch. "I have it all." She lunged, weak fists hitting my chest. But the orderlies pulled her back, sedated her. I stood, adjusted my coat. "Get better," I said, walking out. Her screams followed me, muffled by the door. The drive home was quiet. I'd given her the truth, let it sink in. She'd rot there, knowing I'd won. Clara's breakdown after my visit sealed her fate. The facility called. She'd trashed her room, ranted about cameras, me, Marcus. "She's not improving," the doctor said. "We're recommending long-term care." I agreed, voice heavy with fake regret. "Whatever she needs." They transferred her to a state hospital, a bleak place with barred windows. She'd stay there, medicated, forgotten. The kids didn't need to know. I'd say she'd moved away, too sick to return. They'd heal without her. Marcus hit rock bottom. Paul tracked him to a shelter, clothes ragged, spirit gone. I sent a final blow, a newspaper clipping of his arrest, mailed with a note. "She laughed when you fell." He'd never know if it was true, but it'd haunt him. Paul saw him last, slumped on a bench, staring at nothing. I let him go then. He wasn't worth more effort. His life was punishment enough. At home, I finished the purge. Clara's last traces, photos, trinkets, went into a fire pit out back. The kids watched solemn. "It's closure," I said, and they nodded. Ellie tossed in a scarf. Sam added a card she'd written him years ago. Flames ate it all, and we stood there, a new family forged in ash. The perfume stopped, no more ghosts. The house was ours, rebuilt from her ruin. I kept the footage, though. A hard drive, locked in my safe. Every moment of her betrayal preserved. Not for me, for her if she ever got out. A reminder of why she'd lost everything. The kids thrived, oblivious to the war I'd waged. "You're the best dad," Ellie said one night, hugging me. Sam echoed it, grinning. I hugged them back, my victory complete. But I checked on Clara one last time. A nurse I'd paid off sent a photo. Her in a hospital gown, staring blankly, hands limp. She knew I'd done it, and that was enough. I burned the photo, let it curl to ash. The past was dead. A year later, life was steady. Ellie graduated high school, Sam made varsity. I got a promotion, more hours, more money, a new office with a view. The kids called me their rock, and I wore it like armor. Clara was a memory they rarely mentioned, a faded scar. She's better off wherever she is, Ellie said once, and I agreed, keeping the truth buried. The neighbors had moved on too. No more casseroles, just waves over the fence. I'd rebuilt us, piece by piece, on the wreckage I'd made. Marcus was a ghost story. Paul lost his trail, last seen drifting west, a vagrant with no roots. I didn't care. He'd taken enough from me. I'd taken more from him. His sister never reached out, his name never surfaced. I pictured him sometimes, hollow-eyed, clutching that last note I'd sent, and it was enough. He'd live, but not really, surviving on scraps, a shadow of the man who'd crossed me. Clara's fate was sealed. The state hospital sent a final update. She'd stopped speaking, stopped fighting. Catatonic, they called it. I thanked them, hung up, and poured a drink. She'd seen my face that day in the facility, seen the architect of her fall, and it had broken her. I didn't visit again, didn't need to. The footage stayed in the safe, a silent trophy. If she ever woke, I'd be there, ready to show her why. The kids moved forward. Ellie picked a college, Sam dreamed of pro soccer. I coached, cooked, laughed with them, a father unbroken. The house gleamed, new floors, new paint, no echoes of her. I dated once, a quiet woman from work, but it didn't stick. I didn't need anyone else. My revenge had filled that space, a cold, perfect thing I'd crafted alone. One night, I sat on the porch, stars bright overhead. The weight of it all settled. Clara locked away, Marcus erased my family whole. I'd torn them down, built myself up, and no one knew but me. It wasn't joy, not quite. It was power, pure and sharp, a structure no one could crack. I sipped my drink, let the quiet hold me, and knew I'd do it all again if I had to. They'd betrayed me and I'd buried them. That was my story, my victory, my truth.